So everybody, we have two things going on now. And right now in the main Sutton room is Mr. Stephen Harpen, who's going to talk about entraining your brain, balance your biofield, and tuning your chakras, the new synergy of music and marijuana. The maestro of mindfulness music shares insights to optimize being a body, mind, and spirit, oral pleasure, and higher consciousness, featuring his best-selling new release, Cannabis of Dreams, a future Grammy award-winning album. Discover secrets of choosing your personal best sound healing playlist to access the flow state at the speed of sound. Stephen Harpen is a Grammy-nominated recording artist, a pioneering sound healer, author, and educator. His Deep Alpha has been on the Billboard Top 10 New Age charts for an unprecedented 60 weeks. That's 5 years for those that know, and counting, orchestrating a global morphic resonance via sonic brainwave entrainment. And before I put him on, in the next room is the Kip's Baby Room, is Peter Roth talking about claiming your multidimensional powers. Take it away, Stephen.
All right. Hello, everyone. And it's such an honor to be here and also to follow Dr. Hurtak and Dr. Desiree Hurtak. We go back to 1973 when I was doing my research. Part of the reason I have been doing the music that I do and have been working to bring it out into the world is that as part of my master's degree program, I was challenged to prove that the music that I was channeling was creating different effects in people's brainwaves, helping people get into a balanced brainwave state more effectively than any classical music and any other music that was around. There were subjective responses, but Dr. John Lilly and Dr. Stanley Krippner said, you need to do biofeedback research, brainwave biofeedback research, and then I tapped into the new field of Kirlian photography and Biofield research. And my first album, back when I knew nothing about business or marketing, was called Christening for Listening. And this featured a Kirlian photograph of a leaf. It was in that research that two of the research subjects, which we got for free because they were students at the university, had auras that were 10 times bigger than everyone else. So we called them aside, the scientists that I had hired to run the study, and said, who are you guys? And how come your aura is 10 times larger than anyone else? I mean, it was magnificent. They said, well, we're just students. But once a week, we go down and do a class with Dr. Hurtak. We're up in Northern California. They would drive down to Southern California. And he's coming up here to do a lecture next month. And I was at that lecture and had an instant rapport and understood that this is a man who is unique. He's real, and he's been bringing through, as you heard in his lecture, amazing connections and information ever since. And it's just a delight to follow him. And the album that we did, that he showed you at the end, has a power that combines sacred syllables and sacred tones. What I focus on is mostly the tones. And part of the reason for this is simple. Well, in a non-controlled environment, anytime you listen to words, that part of your brain, the left hemisphere, the analytical part, is paying attention. It kind of unbalances the brain. Also, there's an emotional aspect. What I was guided to work with was using music as a vehicle to balance the hemispheres of the brain. Part of the way that I do this is to not have a major melody, to not have major rhythm, and to use specific tones that are so gentle and inviting. The body is able to accept the sounds of particularly the Rhodes electric piano that I use on many of my recordings. You'll hear that on the album called Chakra Suite, which is what the album that was Christening for Listening, which became Spectrum Suite, because not one plant went into a store to buy this album. But Chakra Suite was its original name back when stores said, We don't know what chakras are. People didn't know what chakras were, and you can't use that title. Having said that, what I have been understanding is that in the arc of my career, what I have been putting out there in the world is information that reminds us of the ancient lineage, the ancient sound healing traditions. Edgar Cayce talked about it in ancient Egypt. All the major religions use sound as a vehicle to allow our own vibratory reality to come into attunement that we may more easily entrain and resonate with the higher dimensions. Now, what that means in terms of music and why my music sounds different and why so many reviewers and critics have said, where's the beat? Where's the melody? I go back to the research that I did with, let me give you an example. If I sing a series of ascending frequencies that you will all recognize, watch what happens in your body, in your chest, and watch what happens in your brain. So when I'm singing the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and I don't finish it, how many of you are holding your breath right now? Can you feel that tension in your chest? That creates stress. Your left brain is automatically engaged and analyzing and attempting to predict where the music is going. That unbalances your hemispheric reality. Your left brain is dominant. What we want for higher consciousness is balance, whole brain synchronization. And most music doesn't do that because of the melody, because of the rhythm, because of the predictability. Now, most people, particularly my graduate professors who are addicted, like many classical musicians, to classical music, could not understand that. And they were so locked into their modality of responding to music that they couldn't get into the mindful state of being in the moment, of being at peace in the moment. 1975, when my first album came out, we didn't have words like mindfulness out in the public. We didn't have words like chakras out in the public. Now we do, and people have more of an understanding of what it means to get into this state of balance. Well, in this state of balance, wonderful things happen. Let me just sing that phrase again, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. When you don't get that last note, you get what I call scaleless interrupters. Not to be confused with the more sexual aspect of interrupters as a very fallible form of birth control, but scaleless interrupters create stress. Most people have no idea that there's a subliminal stressful reaction going on when they listen to most music. Now, this doesn't mean that most music shouldn't be listened to. Of course it should. A lot of music is great. There's an emotional aspect. There's a physical aspect. I listen to all kinds of music. But when you're looking for relaxation and meditation, you want to get music that gets you into a balanced state of consciousness. And that's not what a lot of music out in the world has done. On the Billboard charts, I would dare say my album, Deep Alpha, with a little Billboard Grammy award in there, was the only album, just about the only album ever, that balanced brainwaves and made it onto the Billboard New Age chart. And to be there for 60 weeks, when it first came out in 2012, and then for the last, over the last year, it got on. It's been bumped out now by people who don't play New Age music, the piano guys, and a host of other people that I won't go into what I think about the chart. But the reality is that now that people can make their own playlists on Spotify and Pandora and say, hey, Alexa, play some Harpen, the expansion and the predictions that I received early in my career that the music would be serving the planet, creating more harmony out in the world, is really happening. So if you have CDs, if you're old school like myself, I love CDs. I like being able to put it on my player and listen to the entire album. But however you like to listen is the way that you should do it. But what you should also do is give yourself the opportunity to be there with the music for at least 5 minutes a day. For automatic stress reduction and balance, I'm going to tell you why this is important in a second. Give yourself a chance to come into that state of balance. This happens automatically with most every one of my albums. There's a few that are more rhythmic. That's a different series. But my recent albums like Ocean of Bliss will get you into a highly attuned state that entrains your brain to the dominant frequency of the planet, the Schumann resonance, about 8 cycles per second. And that is the same frequency that we have entrained into the album Cannabis Dreams. And that's also what you get into with Chakra Suite when you just allow yourself to be with the music. Our bodies are so ready to shift into this state of balance. One of my mentors, the great scientist Itzhak Bentov, wrote the book Stalking the Wild Pendulum and says, if you would ask the body, how would you like to be stimulated? Would you like to be just rattled and hit with dissonant sounds? Or would you like to be stroked? Would you like to be caressed by sound? I come from the caressed by sound school of being. And that's what I put out a lot over the years. I'm going to talk about the new album in a moment because it builds on everything else that I've been talking about. What we found out, and what scientists like Dr. Hertak and Dr. William Tiller and others have found out, is that when you get into a deeply relaxed state, there was a bestseller that many people don't remember now by Dr. Herbert Benson called The Relaxation Response. And Itzhak Bentov, also in the Boston area at the same time, were working on the same aspects that when you get the body balanced, a whole host of different circumstances happen in the body. Different neurohormones are secreted. You also secrete the little squirts of joy juice, the endorphins, naturally happen when your body shifts into a state of greater balance. What also happens is when the blood going out of the heart, now that the heart is beating more rhythmically instead of randomly, like with most music, the blood that goes up into the brain pulses the brain in a periodic fashion that sets up an associated electromagnetic field around the head that then entrains naturally, electromagnetically, to the natural electromagnetic fields of the earth itself. So that literally you tap into a much larger power source when you're doing yoga, when you're meditating, and when you're listening to music like this. Now, if you're multitasking, it's not going to work as well. And many people say, well, I don't have time to listen to a whole album. Fine. I come from New York, as many of you know. I said this to the music therapist who said, if you listen to a whole album of classical music, you'll be relaxed. And I said, I don't have time to listen to a whole album. What do you got that could get me there in 5 minutes? And in 1973, they said, there's no music that could get you into a balanced brainwave state. And I said, look at this research. There is now. There wasn't before my album. There is now. And I've done 100 albums since then that get you into that state automatically. All you need to do is to listen, to be there. And this concept of attuning to the electromagnetic field of the earth, but also to the higher dimensions. And this is where my work ties in with the work of Desiree and Dr. Hertak, Doctors Desiree and JJ Hertak. Let me get them both properly acknowledged there, who have been doing their work around the world for many, many decades. Okay, so let me also just define a couple of things. Entrainment, there's a couple words I've used, entrainment and resonance. Entrainment is, and brainwave entrainment is one form of two major forms of entrainment. Entrainment meaning that a stronger rhythmic stimulus will cause a weaker rhythmic reality to synchronize with the stronger frequency. So that if I'm tapping my hands like this right now, your heartbeat will virtually instantaneously match this beat. And if I speed it up, your heartbeat will be speeding up. And if I slow it down, your heart will slow down. I mean, musicians know that. They may not know this intellectually, but they know it obviously by the music they play and watching the reaction of the audience. Well, that's physical entrainment, working with the heartbeat, and that is measured in beats per minute. The more subtle form of entrainment is brainwave entrainment, which happens in terms of beats per second, or what we call cycles per second, which is also called Hertz, Hertz, abbreviated HZ. And that's why you'll see some of my albums talking about 8 Hertz, and the deeper albums like Deep Theta get you down into 7, 6, 5, and 4 Hertz. And when you get into that frequency, you activate much deeper levels of cellular communication in the body. It's the place and the state where you could communicate most effectively with your genes. You could instruct your DNA to express for higher levels of wellness. This is the topic of one of Dr. Deepak Chopra's recent books. It's the breakthrough that Dr. Bruce Lipton brought out in the biology of belief, that when you can speak to your genes, speak to your cells, you can manifest, you can control some of your destiny. You're not locked into just heredity. I remember when I met Dr. Lipton, I said, Bruce, that's great. How do you speak to your genes? What's the secret formula? He says, you just use English. They understand. It works. I said, how could something that simple work so profoundly? And that's the same way as the music. It's simple, it's profound, it's how we are biologically pre-programmed, and that's how we are built. All systems in the body, if you go back and read Dr. Benson's book, systems in the body work together. Music like this supports the body's innate intelligence. And that's what we're saying. I don't have to say that I have the answer that will tell you how to heal. I set the table and your body chooses what it needs to heal itself. That also is a wonderful way of empowering the listeners. And the amazing thing is it does even work if you're listening as background music. When I first came out into the public, a lot of people only listened to my music as background. It was background in yoga classes. One of the ways I met Mark Becker was he was using my music in yoga class. He said, this music is great for doing yoga. Many people have discovered that. But when you listen to it as a meditative focus with focused intention and attention, the music can take you much deeper and much higher. And that brings me to the tie-in with the 2 recent albums, the series that began several years ago, the first one being Echoes of a Dream. I had been working with several compositional structures that I would add on to over a series of months. And then I met a remarkable vocalist named Kristen Hoffman. And I invited her to overdub on one of the arrangements that I had done. She recorded in her studio, sent me back her incredible vocals and the harmonies, which included things that I had heard in my head and then went far beyond that. And that then became the title track of Echoes of a Dream. Many other great tracks on the album. But what was so fascinating for me is that as I listened to the music, as I often do, as I'm falling asleep, I do editing in bed as I'm falling asleep, and then I get edit suggestions in dreams. Sometimes I get woken up, I'm gonna make little notes. Other times, once I hear it, I can remember what I heard next time in the recording studio, I will add on to that. And what happened is one of the tracks on Echoes of a Dream kept telling me, we want to be an entire album, or we want to be the focus of an entire album. And I kept adding parts and then taking parts off, making audible what I heard in dreams and in meditation. And that then became the Cannabis Dreams album. Literally, a lot of my inspiration came in meditation and in dream. Now, the other part of the inspiration came starting mostly in 2015, when a leading cannabis dispensary here in Northern California contacted me and wanted me to be a brand ambassador. This was right after cannabis became legal recreationally in California. Before then, I had been invited, and I said, that's probably a little beyond what I could deal with right now. But now that it was legal, I said, sure. Who else is going to be in the brand ambassadors? There was Margaret Cho, the great comedian, and several porn stars. I was the only musician. I go, well, this is an interesting population base. Unfortunately, the program didn't last very long, but they gave me the strain that I had asked about to be spiritually uplifting, meditative, and healing. And the master growers infused that marijuana with that vibration, so that when I would have just a little bit, and I'm a very microdose kind of guy, it would get me into a place where I could tap into the music week after week. I'm in the studio once a week, where I could go back to the same place, smoking the same strain of music, same strain of cannabis, and hear the same music. And that became the structural basis upon which I completed Cannabis Dreams. Interestingly, after I finished the album, I read an interview with Carlos Santana in Forbes magazine, of all places, that he was promoting and describing the release of his new line of premium cannabis, grown with the intention of creating healing, uplifting, and meditative experiences to let your light shine. And I said, well, these are the same things that I was working with in 2015. I better try some of this. So luckily, there was a dispensary that were delivered near me. I ordered some, and within 10 minutes, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, after they delivered my first sample, I had shifted from out of being in my office work mode to needing to go outside and meditate. And this was now the end of October. It was California, it was still an Indian summer, warm day. And I realized his strain was imbued with wonderful, uplifting vibrations. I needed to go back into the studio and record some new music inspired by that strain. And those are the last 2 songs that I added to the album. Now, of course, in my research, in my experience, like some of the people, the old timers, the veterans of the 60s, I started exploring higher consciousness in the 60s. I actually had the honor of being in English 102, freshman English class, with someone who became a major leader in the legalization of marijuana, Dr. Michael Aldrich. And he shared with us that in order to really get deeper into the music of the Beatles, particularly the song that he was featuring that day, Tomorrow Never Knows, featuring some of the lyrics from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, you needed to be in the same state of consciousness. And he would say that, of course, because he was a librarian and a research scholar, he had researched the use of cannabis and related substances going back 5,000 years in many, many cultures around the world. And most people who have turned on to marijuana have no inkling of how honored this herb has been in South America, in Asia, in the Middle East, various variations like keef or hash or whatever. But the fact that this would uplift consciousness and bring us in closer contact with the divine is all part of higher consciousness. I don't know how many people have researched yet the effects of having some ingesting or smoking marijuana and seeing how that balances brainwaves. And I believe that really changes depending on the strain that you smoke and how much you smoke, in the same way that just saying listening to music is a useless phrase. What kind of music? Even if you say listen to classical music, what kind? Even if you say listening to Mozart, I have 12 different versions of one Mozart sonata. Which one is the correct one that's most like Mozart? We have no idea. None of us have heard Mozart play. And we do know from all the stories we've heard, Mozart was a very ADHD individual. So his music might help people who have ADHD calm down, but it makes people like me more hyper. And that's why I never found myself so attracted to a lot of classical music, searching for the quiet beyond that storm. Well, look, going back in music, as I mentioned, we have anecdotes and historical records, although we can't hear them. We know that music was used in ancient Egypt and China and Greece, the great Pythagoras. And many of us trace our roots to the ideological patron saint, Pythagoras, and the theories of sound healing and concepts with that. It seemed natural to put together these two ancient lineages and say it's time to look at the entourage effect to get even more benefit by consciously selecting certain strains and certain music. And as always, quantity changes quality. So you may, if you're wanting to explore that, look at less is more. And I also want to point out that you don't need anything other than the music. As I was working with this, the phrase popped into my head. This album, in fact, most of my albums, create an auditory contact high. So just by listening, your cells are restructured and reorganized and reharmonized to come into greater harmony with each other. Your brain waves are balanced in the same way that pioneers like Dr. John Beaulieu, who's done such great research and shared such great information with tuning forks. And the people who've come after him, who very often don't credit him, and I think they invented things that John was working on in the 70s. Like myself and like Dr. Hertak, we were doing stuff in the 70s that 20 or 30 years later, people come out and say, we invented this or we discovered this. And we're going, wait a minute, we have this book, we have this album from 30 years ago. The book that I did for Harpen Row, Sound Health. You'll find chunks of this in many other people's book, always uncredited because they use so many of the concepts. But back then, we could even talk about healing. That's why this was called Sound Health and not Sound Healing. At that point, the FDA was still saying, if you're working with music and creating relaxation, we consider, at least one of the representatives from the FDA that we met, a bunch of us in the industry, said that we consider an album like this could be a medical device. And since you, Mr. Halpern, are not an MD, we think we might have a problem there. And I go into that in my memoir, which I'm working on now. But very quickly, better brains at the FDA realized that that's not a problem. And I did ask, coming from my New York sense of humor, I meditate, Mr. FDA guy. I meditate looking at a sunset. How come you don't bust the sun? And he said with a straight face, the sun doesn't promote relaxation on the back, on the tray liner of his CD. Bada-bum. So at that point, he said, you have to take out the words brainwave entrainment and relaxation from all your albums, which was a major undertaking. And the next year, that whole political landscape changed. And everyone started talking about healing and brainwaves and music. And it suddenly became a thing. And music that was not balancing brainwaves, because there are no authorities that say truth in advertising is a viable concept. People could say anything. And music that I know was very unbalancing was being heralded as relaxing, brain balancing, etc. So you need to do the homework. And when you get into a relaxation, any of you who've meditated, any of you who've listened to crystal bowls or tuning forks or have done yoga, you know what relaxation felt like. If you're like me, you didn't realize that a great majority of the population of the United States in particular, and the whole Western cultures, never really knew what relaxation is. They think that watching a football game or a basketball game is relaxing. Anything that wasn't getting yelled at by your spouse or by your boss was relaxing. Not true. One of the things that I learned in my early research was that when you ask the body through galvanic skin response, through brainwave measurements, etc., the body will tell you if you are relaxed. And we had several people in that first study who got so stressed, according to their biological output, in the galvanic skin response, what's used for lie detection, that they were so out of touch with their body that they think that they were relaxed. And maybe for them, that was relaxation. But it's not a viable, meaningful, and healthful level to not be able to get into relaxation state. Again, going back to the work of Herbert Benson, one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to build in moments of relaxation into your daily life. If you don't have a 20-minute period to meditate, the type A adult ADHD version is take a couple minutes a couple times a day. One of the reasons I did this album, ADHD Mindful Music for Enhanced Focus, was because people in the ADHD and ADD community were contacting me and saying, our son, our classroom, we use your music and students are able to focus and stay concentrated better than anything else we ever tried, better than drugs, which got me in trouble with the pharmacy industry, that was the pharmaceutical industry that was selling drugs to that community. And some of them are needed and some not. Some people work well with Mozart and classical, some don't. What I'm suggesting is that not only for children, and of course now with so many people with the pandemic working at home or in classrooms, we need all the help we can get. And it's about time that we use music more consciously, more specifically, to do what it can do, even in the background. And I've had teachers in high school from Beverly Hills to South Carolina, California to Washington, all over, even down the road from Dick Cheney up in Wyoming or Montana, wherever he is. There were teachers who I met at a conference who were using my music, and they said, we don't tell them what we're doing. We just know that our students are performing so much better now since we started using your music, but you don't have any albums that have the word ADD or ADHD, which is what we need to sell it to the school board. So as a producer, I took the music that they were using, which included music from Chakras Suite, Ocean Suite, and Comfort Zone, put that together, put a new title, and guess what? It worked on me even more than I thought it would when I was doing it, which is why I also did a version with subliminal affirmations to really focus consciousness and to allow me to work with greater efficiency rather than procrastinating as much. I'm more organized. So even though I knew what the words were, because with a subliminal audio soundtrack, you don't hear the words, but your subconscious mind does. And it goes directly in. There's no conscious resistance. and you can operate more effectively. And what the research is showing now is that there's a lot of adult onset ADD and ADHD. It's not just for kids. People who weren't necessarily that way through much of their lives because of all the 5G and the electromagnetic pollution and everything else that's going on. We are more of that now. And I recognize some of those symptoms. And for me, when I meditate, it's like, well, what should I do about this? It's like the answer was simple. Hey, you're a musician, you're a composer, you have access to the best music for this. Put together a product that will help you, that could also help people out in the world. And the fact that it's now available in the streaming universe, Alexa, play some Harpen, is a revolution. And it's also, when you tap into those streaming platforms, like Spotify or Pandora or iTunes or Apple Music, etc., and even now Amazon, but the ones that broadcast to everyone, what I discovered and what came as it's a meditative insight when I was at my chiropractor's office, who have their PA system tuned to my Pandora station because it works, not just because I'm a patient there. They were doing that before I became a patient. That when the track one, Chakra One from my Chakra Suite album, Keynote C, Color Red, comes on because millions of people have listened to that album since 1975, all around the world. And we've all gone into a balanced brainwave state where our electromagnetic frequencies around our head interact with the dominant frequencies of the planet. We all are linking together, and that's the concept that Mark mentioned in the intro of morphic resonance. There is a habit in the earth field that when people hear this music, it makes it easier for all of us to go into that state. It makes it easier for new people to get into that state. And the scientist who brilliantly came up with this theory, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, go back and check his books. He was well known back in the early days with the concept of the 100th monkey phenomenon, where when you get a certain critical mass of consciousness, that wonderful things happen. But he's gone far beyond that. And my sense, in my opinion, and in my early research, I believe that this is really happening, that when people hear music that millions of other people have heard, and that's the other thing about the streaming platforms, instead of having thousands of people like at the expo, millions of people now can listen to the same piece of music at the same time without knowing that other people are listening to it, but we're all going into a heightened meditative state more easily. Now, on your own, when you take time, you have your own experience, but these are ways to maximize your own well-being and do something nice for your body, mind, and spirit. Your cells appreciate it, your consciousness appreciate it, and it really takes being on the planet to another level, because we are now dealing with so many more vibrational assaults than we ever have been before. When I wrote my first book, Tuning the Human Instrument, and in Sound Health, there were big sections on noise and noise pollution. And Mark always likes to comment about that, because when I would visit him back in the 1980s at his apartment in New York, I would hear all these noises and I'd say, what's making that noise? Or, I can't sleep. What is that? Well, it was the refrigerator in another room, or it was the gas pilot on the stove. He didn't hear it. I hear it. I've also been tested at audiology labs, and I'm one of those people who does hear beyond the machines. I hear beyond the frequency range that they're able to measure. So it's not just metaphysical, but a physical reality that I have to deal with is it's a double-edged sword. It allows me to hear the music that I do, but it also means that I get stressed by a lot of sounds that don't bother a lot of other people. But music, like the music I do, helps balance that out. And when you nurture and enhance and support your own nervous system, your own biological reality, you're better able to deal with what is going on in the world around you. It's just like getting enough sleep. It's just like getting enough vitamins and minerals in your food or in your supplements. We need that now because we're not living out in the country 150 years ago. So those are all really important things. If you have crystal bowls, or even one crystal bowl, I believe that everybody should, if I were president, everybody would have a crystal bowl or a Tibetan singing bowl at home. And let me just demonstrate this. And you may be able to hear the subtle pulsations of this 18th century Tibetan bowl, which I'm just going to strike. It's often called the singing bowl, but we're just going to listen to it, and then I'll give you a secret. Now listen to the furthest away sound, and you hear that wah, 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 wah. And let me try another kind of mallet. Oh, you couldn't add a thing. So within seconds, that will change your physiology. Within seconds, that will change your brain waves. And within seconds, it's legal, it's non-addictive, it's non-fattening, there's no harmful side effects. That's why so many traditional cultures used instruments like this, because it took them into the alpha state and some of the bowls into the theta state. When I first heard the Rhodes electric piano, I heard it in meditation before I had ever seen one. And the first time I saw one, I was playing in a band that was opening for Herbie Hancock in San Francisco, Herbie, the great jazz musician. And he had one of the very first Rhodes electric pianos. And as soon as I heard it, he played, just as he was warming up, an arpeggio going up the scale, and I had an out-of-body experience. And I said, I need to get one of those instruments. Sold my spare guitar, sold my spare trumpet, and that launched me in my healing music career when I had an instrument that I could play that would instantly, and get this, not only relax the audience and the listeners, but it would relax me. And as you listen to the vibrato and the phase shifting on the way that I have the Rhodes piano set up, I just had a revelation the other day that without knowing it, I was going into a theta state without smoking anything, without doing anything else, automatically, as soon as I sat down at my Rhodes and started playing, because I would set up the tone and the vibrato to just entrain my brain. But we didn't have that language to describe it as such in those days. So this is built into so many of my recordings because it's an instrument that basically no one else is playing nowadays. Everyone else plays just synthesizer variations and imitations of the true Rhodes electric piano. It's like a series of tuning forks. It's a magical instrument. Harold Rhodes was so delighted that I was promoting his instrument for healing, because that's what he invented it for in the 1940s for shell shock war veterans, that I was named one of the Rhodes Scholars. And at one point, there was going to be a big concert with myself and Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock and a number of other musicians who play it, but they couldn't get the concert together, so it never happened. But the instrument is magical, and that's part of the secret ingredient of my recordings. So a couple of things. Since I can't play live here today, you can hear samples, the longest samples, meaningful samples of a minute or minute and a half on my website, stephenhalpernmusic.com. If you go to Amazon, you could have a 30-second sample, which is good, but not enough. Back in the day, we would always start out with a slow, drone to get you into the state before the first notes would come in. Nowadays, with short attention span theater, we got to get right into the thing. And on my website, you have time to get the build-up and hear the music on all the tracks. But and also on YouTube. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/Stephen Halpern Music. I've just been creating a number of new videos, both for Cannabis Dreams, there's one that just went up last week. That will, well, obviously do not drive when you're watching it, but do not drive after watching it because the effects linger just on its own. It's some great imagery, some great music. And there's a new one that'll be going up next week on for Deep Theta. There's a number of them for Deep Alpha and Deep Theta. They're already up there. Check them out after the expo. Enjoy. I see that my time is just about ending now. But my handle is
You
at
can talk a
Stephen
little more.
Halpern for Twitter.
You can talk a little bit more if you like.
Okay.
Tell people to get in contact with you.
Okay. Wow. There's a voice that just came out without the.
This is and also, you know, and he's very eligible, by the way. He's an eligible bachelor. So get common contact. He has an email and he has phones and he has the whole thing. I'll come back in a bit. Maybe do about 5 more minutes.
Okay, great. So the concept, and there's one other thing. Now, over the years, I have mostly focused on instrumental tone because it is a way to get beyond the emotional attachment. When we watch the Grammy Awards, when we watch the concert for New York City and all these great events, or Live Aid, the host always talks about the healing power of music. But that's always about the healing power of music and words and chord patterns. And the ones that we know that are great because they do so many great things. Just like so many of the Beatles songs, whether or not they compose all or they had a team working, their songs were brilliant and opened up the world of music for all of us. I obviously spent a lot of time listening to the final chord of A Day in the Life in various states of consciousness, when you hear all those shifting harmonics and the different overtones. And I worked with my engineers in the early days to develop a certain array of microphones that would extract and record the harmonics of the grand piano and the other instruments in ways that most other engineers would try to get rid of. We just want the note. Now I say, no, it's not just a note, but it's all the harmonics, the higher overtones. And that would remind me of one other important point. With music, it's not just the notes, but it's the energy that comes through. And I can tell you that every album that I have released, I have been in a meditative state. I can't play this music if I'm not in a meditative state. The music comes from a place of peace. I get into that state of mindfulness, and then I wait and I listen, and then I play. And I don't know the next notes that I'm going to play because I improvise when I'm recording. It's spontaneous composition, improvisation. But when I play one phrase, as I listen to the overtones, I'll hear the next phrase, and then I play that. And as I play the next one, I can't remember what I just played. So I am totally in that state. And because of that, that energy, that information field gets recorded, whether we had the old analog reel-to-reel tapes or it gets recorded now into the computer. It is transmitted and radiated when you listen. So you pick up not just on the music and the notes that I play, but on the state of consciousness that I am the focal point. And as I've mentioned over the years, I learned early on that I work with a band. Most of you can't see them, but I have co-creators and co-composers, and I've gotten inspiration from a number of different higher dimensional beings and some famous composers that I'll be talking about in my memoir. But I'll just mention a couple names. Find out more reading about Rosemary Brown. Read the book On a Slide of Light by Greta Woodrue, where they talk about some of the experiences that were witnessed by other people. And of course, in the studio, when magic happens, even though there's only myself in the studio and in the console room is the engineer, we have audible proof and sometimes video proof where the studio room is filled with light. And then we know that, yes, the band is in the house, the band of angels, the band of, they don't announce to me by name, but I could feel the energy. And that's been part of the secret ingredient that has really helped take the music to a higher octave, and a blessing for all of you. So thank you so much for your attention today. Do get in touch. Inner Peace Music, StephenHalpernMusic.com. info@innerpeacemusic.com is the email to get through to me. And God bless. And I'll be tuning in for the rest of the expo afternoon and tomorrow also.
See you later, my brother.
Bye for now.
Okay. So right after Stephen, right, is going to be Jill Dane. Jill Dane, our Florida psychic, is going to be talking about love and relationships. And in the Kips Bay room is Kat James. She is here from Montana. She'll be virtual. She's going to talk about the ultimate biohack, harnessing leptin to transform your body, brain, and looks. So again, Kips Bay room is Kat James. And in this room right here will be Jill Dane. And Stephen Halpern, you're the best. Love you.
Thank you. Love you too. Bye now.